everyone. In this video I'm going to show you all how to model the hand, and in order to get started, one of the first things that I do is I start with actually modeling the fingers. So going ahead and taking a look at my reference here, I have a few drawn in. They're not really the greatest drawing of hand. The thumb works okay, I guess. But again, the perspective of it and the scale of it may not be 100% accurate. So I'll have to play around with some of the proportions of my character's hands and fingers in order to get it looking right in the perspective view. So the first thing I'll do is, again, I'm going to start with a polycylinder. I'm going to change my subdivision axes to 8, and then I'm going to go ahead and drag this up, and I guess I'll start on this side over here. Another thing I'll do is I'll delete the caps. Really repetitive process for pretty much most of the model. And I will begin to just model it in. So I'm gonna sort of stray from the hand drawing I did here. I don't think it's absolutely necessary to follow the reference due to sort of things like perspective, scale, and distortion in just the fingers bending and things like that. However, with the hand being drawn out like this, if you're using photo references, it may be a good idea, as long as the fingers are sticking straight out. Most importantly, probably the index, but you could sort of figure it out size from any other one. But if you do have at least one finger that you do have a great reference from, it's a great idea to use that in order to get the proper scale, proportion, etc. However, if you don't, like mine's a little skewed here, we'll kind of eyeball it and see how it goes. You can kind of tell when things don't look 100% right when you're modeling them in. Alright, so let's go ahead and just dive right in here and switch over here. So I've already gone ahead and deleted the caps on here, and the finger, again, it is pretty cylindrical. However, it does sort of flatten out as it gets out to the fingertips, if you will, just a little bit. So I will try to use my reference here as best as possible, but again, I don't think it's 100% accurate. So there's a couple ways to go about doing this, but I'm going to use the box modeling. Before I deleted those caps, actually, I could essentially in fact, actually, if this one turns out fine, I'll just do it. Use this one. Something like so. So I just scaled it a little bit, and what I can do is I can start with some of these, adding in some subdivision levels. I do feel like that finger being off bent a little bit, that might be an accurate size of it, so I'll just go with that. The route I was going to go with before that was just going to be the extrude method. Extrude, scale out, or move out, extrude, move out, extrude, move out, yada yada, so on and so forth. But because I have, I'm just going to go with this one. And then also, for those of you who are unaware of, I definitely have shown it in my 3D Modeling 1 course at some point or another, I believe. I'm almost positive. Um, but what I just did is to isolate this object is Shift-I to isolate just that object, if that's the only object you want to be able to look at while you're modeling. And then when you want to bring everything back, you can click off the model, just make sure nothing's selected, and press Shift-I again, and then that will bring everything back, just so you're aware. So um, again, I've got the finger here, and I'm going to get back to it. Now, just a side note, those changing any of those attributes in the attribute editor as far as subdivision levels and things like that will not work once you've made any modifications to the model, such as deleting faces, things like that. So you need to do it first thing. And now I've deleted the caps on here. Now, I'm basically just going to start to put this into the shape of a finger, give or take. I feel like this might be way too wide, like way too wide, but I'll start with what looks right as far as scale, and then I will begin to bring it down accordingly. Alright, so I feel like this will be the middle of it, and make it a little bit wider for the knuckle. And then we've got one more, which I think I'm just going to cut in one extra edge loop right here. So I'm going to hold Control, and then I'm going to hold Shift, and it sort of snaps to like every, I don't know, 10, 15, 20%, but it will go right directly in the center at 50. That's about right. That's definitely right. And why I did that is because I want that to be this section right here. I want to be the knuckle for the tip of the finger. Give it a little bit wider. And then these two, I actually want to bring in just a little bit. And I just double-clicked each edge loop to select the entire edge loop. And then I'm just going to scale them in a little bit because the knuckle needs to be a little bit smaller. Alright, so right now I'm only working on just the top view of the shape and things like that. And this will be about the middle knuckle. Maybe I bring it back just a smidget. And I'm also going to create two more edge loops in here. I'm just going to hold Control. I'll put one like here, one like there, and that'll start to be the center knuckle. And maybe of the finger. Now once we have one of these done, we'll be able to basically duplicate it and reuse it a number of times. So for the tip, I'm going to hold Shift, right click, and I'm going to go to Fill Hole. And what that does is select the entire edge loop and just fill hole. Hold Shift, right click, fill hole. And then I did this with the modeling the shoe foot video. And then I'm just going to use the multi-cut tool to sort of bring that in. And this is going to be basically for my fingertips. Now, it might be a little on the sharp side, but I think once you scale this down, it'll have more of a proper look to it. And this might be just a little bit too out. But if you tap 3 on your keyboard, you'll start to get a better idea of what the finger will look like. So always you can just kind of look and reference your hand and see how that looks. If I go off of, where did it go? I notice like my knuckles here are a little bit wide. This one's not so much wider, but it does sort of come down. So in size. So you can kind of play around with it. But the important part is now the side of it. You'll notice it's got sort of these loopy little sections in your finger, and I want to make sure that I utilize that detail. It doesn't need to be perfect, however, it definitely helps convey the proper look to it. And these minor adjustments, I'm just selecting the center something like that. And even in here I might need one more. So I created one more edge loop right there using my multi-cut tool and holding Control and Shift. So I'd say that's a pretty good start, and actually even right here at this point and this point, this will probably come up a little bit too. And maybe even want to, just sort of shape it out a little bit. Alright, you don't need too much detail, but it definitely helps to have some of that information in there. And this is a little bit higher on the poly side, but I do believe it will more than likely help you, at least visually, when you're modeling it. I always find, especially beginner modelers, including myself, when I first started learning, I always felt like modeling with more topology was easier for me because I had a better understanding of the shape and the depth, and I just didn't understand how low poly at the time could really be transferred over well to high poly. But I do think having sort of that happy medium make it a little bit more narrow maybe. Having that sort of happy medium certainly will help both visually understanding and just not getting into too much extra work with all that extra topology, because the more topology you have, the more stuff you have to do. So I feel like this is a pretty good happy medium for the finger, because there is a lot of detail in the hands. Aside from the face, when we watch film, animation, whatever, 90% of our focus is typically on the face. After that, it goes to the hands, because we use a lot of hand movements, gestures when speaking, even just for emotion, oh my god, or what have you, right? So it's always good to have a good amount of detail in the hands. Alright, so I'm pleased with the shape and size of this one index finger at the moment. Let's go ahead, come back here, and maybe even, I may have, there we go. So I think it's alright. It might be maybe it's a little bit too long. Shorten it out a little bit, bring it back. That'll probably work. Alright, so another thing I like to do is I like to hold D and hold V. D will edit pivot. You'll notice if I hold D here in the tool settings, that's the one little hammer, Holding D will edit pivot. Holding V up here will toggle on and off snapping to verts. And I'm going to snap this just to the end of this finger here, the edge of it, at the very end. So this is going to be the index finger I have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Shift D, and I'm going to slide this over, and I'm going to press Shift D again and Shift D again. And what Shift D does is it does edit, duplicate with transform. So basically it retains the information here in your channel box of anything that has changed from the previous duplicate. So when I press Shift D and I move this first one over, it noticed that my translate information had changed from the previous one. So it knows, oh, it moved this much distance in the channel box. For the next one, we're going to move it the same exact amount of distance to the next point. So that's all it's doing. Shift D, duplicate with transform. Now, from here, I need to basically begin to get these fingers a little bit scaled differently. So I'm going to tap R, and the first thing I'm going to do is with my middle finger, I'm actually just going to scale it right from here. And you'll notice it's only expanding from this point at where I placed the pivot point, which is really, really great. Now that seems a little bit too much, but I do like how it's scaled evenly distributed to begin with. So I'm going to stick with it for the most part, but then I'm going to just kind of slim it down where I feel like it could be a little bit over exaggerated. So we know the middle finger is a little bit longer, and if you take a look at your hand, and where's the camera? You'll notice it's almost like basically a fingernail in length longer than the previous finger on the middle finger. It kind of works that way all the way through, except till you get to the pinky. The pinky is a much smaller finger in comparison to the others. So try to get it just right. Doesn't have to be perfect, but as long as you can kind of tell. So I'll know that's the middle finger. And then the ring finger is actually a little bit longer, at least in my hands, than my index. So my ring finger is a little bit longer. So I know I need to make this one, just scale it up. It's a little bit shorter than that, but also a little bit longer than my index. So start with that, maybe a little bit more. And then the pinky is much smaller. So I'm going to start by going about here. I'll even bring that in, bring it down just a little bit. And I'd say that's a pretty good start to the fingers of my character here. And then the thumb is actually, it's about the size, if you look at it. Where's the camera? The thumb is almost about the same size as the index finger, give or take. So slightly different, but the thumb also reaches all the way, the joints anyway, reach all the way down here into the hand, inside the lifeline part here. So the last joint's somewhere located right in this area. Good to keep in mind because we will be adding joints to this later on. And when we get there, we'll cover it in much more detail. But also don't forget, while you're working on this, edit, delete all by type history, clear some of that information out, because that information does, if you notice your computer's running a little bit slower or something, it's always a great thing to check first. Again, back to the thumb. Now I only have one left. I'm just going to duplicate the index and then just sort of move and scale it into place. Now you're going to notice one thing here, that I have the axis orientation actually transferred over with my index finger. It wouldn't work. I don't know if it'll work with these ones because they're duplicates. May or may not, but in this particular case, in order to you'll notice that my scale tool is basically followed the same information as it had before, whereas my move tool doesn't. Now this is the difference between object and world adjustments. So world obviously being X, Y, Z coordinates of the world, the 3D world we're modeling in, and then the changing the axis orientation, that's with the little hammer tool setting, changing the axis orientation to object, you'll notice it changes the direction at which it turns. So a really big thing to note, though, however, is once you freeze transformations on an object, it's no longer going to know the difference between object and world anymore, because you will have cleared all that info out, just so you know. So once you freeze transformations on something, you won't be able to really toggle between world and object orientation, axis orientation on your tools. Anyway, getting back to this, I want my thumb to be wider, a little bit bigger, and probably a little bit shorter. Give it a little bit more, and if, you know, it may be a little bit too much, but a little bit short, stumpy kind of thing. And then I'm going to switch to object, world, and something like that. And you'll notice that if you look at your hand like so, it should come out just a little bit. And I'm also going to check this amongst my reference, something like so, and I'm going to keep it straight for now. You could always angle it a little bit, but I think this is a pretty good start. But one thing with the thumb is that, especially as it gets into the hand, on this particular end, I toggle on my B for soft select and scale, and you may or may not need to adjust the brush. And I'm going to just have it about here, and I'm going to just scale it a little bit bigger when it gets into the actual hand part. So that's modeling the fingers of this. I'm going to save modeling the hand section in the next video. So that covers modeling the fingers and the hand, or modeling the fingers and the thumb. And in the next video, I'm going to cover modeling in the hand and combining the fingers and thumb all together. So, and trying to maintain the cleanest possible topology during that process. So, I know this one it's a little tricky, but really all we did was create a cylinder and just sort of manipulate the edges and vertices for the most part, with a little adjustments at the cap of the finger. But we really haven't gotten into anything too complicated yet with the hand. In the next video, we're going to kind of combine all the tools that we've sort of compiled up to this point, and get the hand all one solid mesh object. Anyway, if you have any questions, be sure to shoot me a message. Yeah, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.